into it as well. So get plugged into the email series. That is soon to begin. All right. We got a lot to get into today, though. It's good to be back with you. I did miss you. Today's a special day. I was thinking about this today. I was thinking about so many of the Catholic martyrs of the Holocaust. And I've said this to you before. I think there's two things you should always, well, three. I'll add a third thing to the bucket list that I think everyone in the planet should do if it was ever possible. One, I think to walk in the footsteps of Christ, right? To pray at Calvary, to be where Christ conquered death and made us sons and daughters of God. That's one. The two other things, I think every human being should walk through the concentration camps of Auschwitz or Treblinka, or there are many of them. You walk through these places and you see man's inhumanity to man. It is a place where evil is palpable. I mean, you could feel the spiritual grit that was left behind by that, and it really shows you what happens when one rejects God and dignity for their fellow man. I'm using the word awesome in a different context. I mean, it's awesome in terms of how humbling it really is and how sobering it is. The third thing is safari. If you ever have a chance to do that, you see God's creation. Absolutely amazing. But those are three things. Today, of course, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And for 6 years, from 1939 in St. Faustina, we just finished the chaplet, prophesied and predicted the start of the Second World War. All the way to 1945, if you know your history, the entire world was involved in a war that back then we didn't want to forget because of how it started. And it started because of one man, a man named Adolf Hitler, who had the ego that could not be satisfied. He had a horribly twisted and bent understanding of the reasons for the world's problems. And for him, it came down to just one group of people, the Jews. And what was his solution? He called it the final solution, right? It was to kill as many of them as possible, to exterminate them. And most of us know what that means, right? He built these horrific concentration camps. He rounded up Jews. And it wasn't just Jews. I know a lot of people think the Holocaust was solely Jews. There were blacks. There were priests. There were homosexuals. There were the mentally unstable. There were the physically incapacitated. There were modern thinkers and professors. And he put them on cattle cars. And he emptied them into these camps. And then unspeakable horrors took place, putting them in small rooms, some to be showered, only to be gassed to death with Zyklon B. And I won't even go into some of the other things that you'll experience if you go to these places. But people of a certain generation know this. Many of us, you and I, were born after this, decades after this, at the end of the war. But our younger generation today really doesn't remember the Holocaust. I mean, you think, you'd want to share this with them, but that's not happening. We know today because there's a 50-state survey that was done just a couple of years ago. This is striking. It found that 63% of respondents did not know. They had no clue that 6 million Jews were murdered. 36% thought that 2 million or fewer Jews were killed during the Holocaust. The other thing that was kind of striking in that survey, and this might surprise you. This is a fact that I don't think a whole lot of people know. There were more than 40,000 camps. There were ghettos in Europe during the Holocaust. 48% of the respondents couldn't name a single one. They couldn't even name the most infamous of them all, the Auschwitz. They couldn't name that. I'll give you one final thing here. I want to speak to of course, Roy Schoeman, who's going to be joining me. It's always good to have him here. But what's really surprising, one that would actually have made Hitler proud, 20% of millennials and Gen Zers today in New York, they actually believe that the Jews caused the Holocaust. Now, you probably find that hard to believe. It's true, according to the survey. 20% of millennials and Gen Zers, again, this is New York they're looking at, believe that the Jews caused the Holocaust. That's dangerous. I know a millennial who was online, and they're being indoctrinated by some of the stuff that's on social media. I had a conversation with this particular person. I'm thinking, you're wrong. And some of the things that are being said are just horrific. You talk about the blame game, right? I'm joined today by an adjunct professor of theology at Ave Maria University and Holy Apostle Seminary. He's been with me many times in the past, wrote a great book, If you want to read it, it's called Salvation is from the Jews, the Role of Judaism in Salvation History. He's written others as well. His website, salvationisfromthejews.com. What a great domain, right? Salvationisfromthejews.com. It's a pleasure to have with me Professor Roy Schoeman. Hey, Professor, good afternoon. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well,
I wonder if I could shine a light on a different angle of
please,
Hitler and the Holocaust for a moment.
Sure.
Which is, it is an example of man's inhumanity to man, but it's really more an example of Satan's hatred of mankind. Mm-hmm. The chief exorcist of Rome, Father Gabriele Amorth, said, quote, "Without a doubt, Hitler was personally consecrated to Satan. Wow. Hitler's first springboard to public prominence was in a cult society in Munich called the Thule Society, where he was initiated into the black arts by Dietrich Eckhart, and in fact, the last sentence of Mein Kampf, which is Hitler's memoirs, so to speak, is a dedication of the work to his mentor, Dietrich Eckhart. Wow. So this hatred of humanity, which did have a particular focus on the Jews, came straight from hell.
Well, I had read also about his fascination with the occult. He went after a lot of these Christian symbols, the sword of Launchius. He would have experiences with demonic entities in his room at night. I think it's a really good point. I think behind a lot of this evil is true and pure evil. So I think that's such a great point. Also, Professor, in the midst of that darkness, right, and in the midst of all that evil, we also see God's grace prevail, right? We see great saints arise in the most horrible situations. I think of Alfred Depp, or I think of Maximilian Kolbe or Edith Stein, or you can go through the list of these. Even the commandant of one of these concentration camps had a great conversion in the end. Your thoughts on that? I mean, we look at the darkness of this, but God's grace is greater than all that evil.
Yeah, but the thing that gets downplayed too much nowadays is it's not just a matter of God's grace. It's actually a matter of Christianity. That we live in a spiritual battlefield, and our minds and our hearts, there are two forces which are trying to take reign of them. And one, of course, is the dark forces. And the other, I hate to say it, is really Christ. Christ is God become man. It's only logical that Christ should have a unique role in the human soul. And when one accepts Christ and invites him in, you have strength against the dark temptations that even if you're a good person and want to be good and are generically religious, you don't have. I don't want to offend any of the listeners, but I'm Jewish by background, so if anyone can say this, it should be, if anyone's permitted to say this, it should be me.
Look, I love what you're saying. I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm saying, go, man, keep preaching. I think you are so right. I love that perspective. No, honestly, I do.
When I was looking into this for this show, actually, I looked up the origin of World Holocaust Remembrance Day. It comes from the UN. Mm-hmm. It comes from UNESCO, whatever that is, United Nations Education and Social something or something. And I looked at their website, and the logo says, quote, "Building peace in the minds of men and women," close quote. That's what Christ does. That's not what the UN does.
Yeah, it's so true. That is so true. I'm going to go to the phones, Professor, take a few calls for you. I got to take a break first. My guest, Professor Roy Schoeman, if you want to get in, I only have him for a short time today, but we'd love to have you join us. The number's 888-914-9149. Taking a look today at Holocaust Remembrance Day. What happened? What have we learned? What have we forgotten, unfortunately? And really was at the heart of all of this. We'll be back with more right after this. Stay with us. Yeah, and that's the bottom line. It's a lot to be anxious and nervous and fearful about today, but we need to have faith over fear. Faith conquers fear, and evil never prevails. Today we remember in a particular way the horrors of the Holocaust. It's Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I'm joined today by a former Jewish man. He is now a very prominent Catholic, a brilliant author, a professor, and it's good to have with me today Professor Roy Schoeman. And Professor, I'm grateful to have you here. I'm struck by the numbers that we see, and I do think that if you fail to remember your past, then you're bound to repeat it. A very famous saying. When I see these poll numbers, and I take polls sometimes with a grain of salt, but some of these numbers are pretty staggering. I had shared, if you're just joining me a few moments ago, that nearly 20% of millennials and Gen Zers in New York believe that Jews actually caused the Holocaust. And, people can't name, a single concentration camp. And it seems that I know this has been a significant period of time now. We're going to be closing in on a century in the not too distant future. But your thoughts on where we are? What are we failing to remember this? I mean, like the World War II and 9/11 will probably follow the same path, and so will other things. How dangerous is that, and what can we do to make sure that we never see something like this again?
Well, again, I would zoom out a little bit and say I think this is a manifestation of the fact that education as a whole is failing, and I think it's
I agree.
How many of those people who didn't know, how many where the Holocaust came from or who was killed or whatever, also don't know where World War I came from or even where the United States came from. I think that our educational system, in the light of the redefinition of it to be trying to eradicate the remnants of original sin or something by making everyone tolerant of everything, has just dropped the ball completely. So I actually I'm more concerned about people growing up and getting to vote and running things who actually have no historical background at all.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I would agree. Let me grab a phone call or two for...
Sure.
No, go right ahead, Professor. I didn't mean to step on you. Go ahead. I want you to finish your thought.
No, please. Grab the phone call. Please, yeah.
All right, Ruth in Austin, you're on the air with Professor Showman. Good afternoon.
Thanks for taking my call. And I agree schools are failing dramatically and in the teaching history, apparently, because in Europe, some of the countries, there's classes only half day and the teachers get to prepare the other half and they go full year. But what I called initially for was to remember that the United States did a genocide on the Indians, the Native Americans. The U.S. Army was told to go out and kill as many as you can, when they were riding around Custer's time and stuff. And then a European king who settled the Congo, he did a genocide there too. But I don't understand how Germany, apparently the anti-Semitism is on the rise again from something I just read. So,
well, Ruth, thank you. I'm going to hold you on that point and let the professor respond.
I think Ruth has a very good point. I mean, it's wonderful to remember the Holocaust, but it's also good to recognize, again, this all boils down to Christianity when you get right down to it, because it is original sin. Man is in a fallen state. It's the natural dynamic for the most brutal and the most greedy and the most power hungry to come to positions of power. And when they are in positions of power, they're going to behave very brutally. We have Pol Pot. How many millions were killed in Cambodia? We have the 10 million that were starved intentionally by Stalin in the Ukraine. I mean, this is fallen human nature. And there is only one remedy to fallen human nature. Sorry, but again, it's Christ.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. This is a spiritual thing at the very heart of it all. Before I go back to the phones, I just want to pick up with you on something you'd said. What she said too. Ruth was saying how anti-Semitism is rising right now. There is a real, rising tide of anti-Semitism happening in our country, and it's so weird why it's always against the Jews, right? Is there a connection between the lack of knowledge we were seeing right now in the Holocaust? You make the case that our educational system's failing, Or would you argue really there's something spiritual, that Satan has a special hatred towards Jews? I mean, how do you view this? I mean,
Oh.
what is it that about anti-Semitism that seems to run across the millennia?
You sound like somebody who might have read my book, Salvation is from the Jews, because it's a major theme. But of course, the ultimate war is between Satan and Christ.
Yeah.
But Satan can't really get at Christ directly. But Christ came to mankind through the Jews. So in some sense, he blames the Jews for the I don't know how to put it, but the incarnation of Christ. Mm-hmm. And we know that the Jews have to be around at the time of the second coming, and there has to be a conversion. Paragraph 674 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, quote, "The glorious Messiah's coming is suspended at every moment of history until his recognition by all Israel." It's church doctrine that Christ can't come again until there's a mass conversion of the Jews.
Right.
When Christ does come again, Satan's game will be completely over. So Satan, A, has a particular vehement hatred of the Jews as basically related to Christ by blood, and B, the more trouble Satan can cause in stopping the Jewish conversion to Christianity, and particularly the Catholic Church, the more he can delay the second coming and the end of his game. And so by stirring up all of this animosity towards the Jews, it makes the Jews actually retreat into their, religious identity, and makes them harder to hear the message of Christ.
All right, my guest, Professor Roy Schoeman. Only a couple minutes left with him. I'll try to grab another caller too. Adriana is listening in New Jersey, the Garden State. Hi, Adriana.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my call. I know you're pressed for time, Professor. Wonderful work. Relevant Radio was phenomenal. I just simply wanted to note that the Holocaust affected so many Poles. I am a miracle grandchild of my grandparents who were in concentration camps. My father was in a POW camp. His three siblings were all in concentration camps, along with various aunts and uncles, and they're Polish Catholics. And they did save Jewish families, which they were honored for at Yad Vashem. And they were saved thanks to their Catholic faith. And my father always kept in his pocket a "Jesus, I trust in you."
Wow.
So I thank you so very much for remembering on this day. Keep going, keep telling people, and let's remember everyone was affected by that hatred and that evil. Thank you so much for taking my call. I'll take comments off the air.
God bless you, Adriana.
And as you point out, the only long-term solution is Christ.
Amen. Professor, I have about a moment or two left for you, so let me give you final thoughts. You heard Adriana, and we've had a lot to talk about in such limited time.
You mentioned in passing, you mentioned St. Maximilian Kolbe, and his motto, so to speak, was "Love alone creates." And there is a message that he left behind very strongly, which is evil can cause a tremendous amount of suffering, but it can't enter your soul unless you let it. Maximilian Kolbe defeated evil by his ability to love, and of course by his great heroic virtue and so forth. But the testimonies from Auschwitz, universally, even among Jews, say Auschwitz was a different place after Maximilian Kolbe's death. What Maximilian Kolbe did changed the atmosphere in all of Auschwitz. This example of love, this example actually of Christ-likeness, transformed the place in a spiritual way. So whatever the outside does to us, and you talk about the fear in the world and so forth, divine providence is overwhelming, and all we have to do is maintain our allegiance with Christ and our interior orientation, and we defeat evil even if we end up on the cross.
My guest today, Professor Roy Schoeman, my deepest gratitude for you, for your wonderful writing, and for your time today. You can check him out online. I'd encourage you to do that and check out so many of the wonderful books that he's written. I'll be right back. Stay with me.